Hey, I am Jamey from Stonemaier Games, and today I'm joined with another Stonemaier Ambassador special guest. This is Justin here. Justin, can you let everyone know who you are and your connection to Stonemaier Games?
Yes. My name's Justin. I've been a huge fan of Stonemaier games for many years now. Started as a champion a couple years ago, and then applied for the ambassador to become an ambassador for Stonemaier. Was selected for that. I've been doing it now for a couple years. Doing whatever I can at board game shops, helping out with board games in general, but especially Stonemaier games is definitely something that I enjoy doing, and spreading the good nature of a Stonemaier.
Well, thank you, Justin. I really appreciate that. And one of
Of
the fun
course.
things we've done the last few years with ambassadors is that whenever I send out a monthly update to ambassadors, I ask them a few questions like, what are your favorite games in this category or that category? And I mentioned them in these videos. So I will in a few minutes have a list of ambassador picks for today's topic, which is worker placement. One of my favorite mechanisms in games, my favorite genres. I'm so excited that you picked this one. I do have one other video that I'll link to below, an older video, but I love revisiting older mechanisms, especially oft used mechanisms. And so let me know why you suggested this. What are you passionate about in terms of worker placement?
Worker placement was for me kind of like the introduction into board games. My very first games were like Dixit and Mysterium. That's kind of what I started with, but I really fell in love, and it's actually on my list here. One game in particular, Lords of Waterdeep, is definitely like one of my favorite games, and I just love the nature of it, how fairly simple it is, but there's a little bit of like a strategy to it, and just worker placement, set collection, all that kind of stuff. I'm a collector in real life of things, so it kind of like it speaks to me a little bit, to say the least.
I love the way you described that. Yeah, and yeah, we'll talk about a little bit, I think, about complexities as we go through this
Yes.
discussion because there's a pretty broad range of worker placement games. We probably have both ends of the spectrum on our lists.
Yes, sir.
So I will share the ambassador picks. So these are games that multiple ambassadors picked when I asked them this question. And in alphabetical order, we have A Feast for Odin, Agricola, Anachrony, Architects of the West Kingdom, Caverna, Champions of Midgard, Darwin's Journey, Dune Imperium, Everdell, Euphoria, Keyflower, Havre, Lords of Waterdeep, Lost Ruins of Arnak, My Father's Work, Obsession, On Mars, this is a long list, Paladins of the West Kingdom, Pendulum, Raiders of the North Sea, Tzolk'in, Village, and Viticulture. Are there any on that list that you're itching to try someday, or maybe that you really like and that you forgot about when you're making this list?
It's kind of funny you mentioned that many of those games I've played before, but the one I keep going back to, it's always the game I bring into people, and I've already talked about it, is Lords of Waterdeep. That's like it's a game I haven't played in a really long time, but it's still a favorite of mine. It's a great gateway game for people, so that's like the one of my favorites, even though it's on the closer on the bottom end of my list for this one. It's still like an all time for me. Yes, sir.
Nice. I'm going to type a little bit while we're talking, Justin, so I can, whenever you mention your games, I'll type them down here. So let's start out with your honorable mention list if you have one, and I'll type while you talk.
Actually, you know what? I did not come up with an
Oh, you don't have one?
honorable
Okay.
mention. Well, now that I think about it, Viticulture will be on that list.
Okay.
Um, I haven't played it enough, but another one, Darwin's Journey, I think could be on that list too. Maybe like in the top
Yeah.
five eventually. That would be probably my two honorable mentions for me.
Okay. I have a short list. Yeah, this topic was hard for me to come down. Usually I do these top 10 lists, so coming up with only
Yeah.
5 was really hard.
Mm-hmm.
So mine, I have 4 Stonemaier games that I'll mention here. Viticulture,
Mm-hmm.
Euphoria, Charterstone, and Pendulum. And then Architects of the West Kingdom, Rajas of the Ganges, Lost Ruins of Arnak, Yedo, The Voyages of Marco Polo, Honeybuzz, A Feast for Odin, Tribune, and Stone Age. 2 pretty old games on that list, actually. Tribune and Stone Age are fairly old at this point.
Yes,
But they're
sir.
still fun to play.
Yes, sir. Most definitely.
So let's start out with your number 5, Justin.
Yes, sir. So my number 5, again, I have talked about it a lot, but Lords of Waterdeep is an absolute classic. One of the very first like modern board games that I saw played. Actually saw it played online. It's actually how I got introduced to it. But simple mechanics in most as most worker placement games are. Put your workers out. You get the people in for whatever missions you're trying to do, and the reason I like it so much is it seems to work very well at all player counts. Like it works very well at 2, or it works very well at at the top end. And then also there's a little bit of anti-king making with the diversion cards, I believe is what they're called, the diversion quest, or those quests that you can give out. Like if you see someone that's like maybe running away with the game, you can maybe try to reel them back a little bit to get yourself back into it. But Lords of Waterdeep's always been a favorite of mine. It was actually a game that was given to me when I went to my first board game shop in the area. Mentioned to the individual that I just gotten married and was interested in buying this game, and he went ahead and gave it to me. So that was at the start of my board game collection.
That's awesome. I must admit that this one appears slightly higher on my list. So I'll hold off on sharing my thoughts for another few minutes on Lords of Waterdeep, but I'm glad you put it on your list. I love that game. So my number 5 is Everdell. It's a modern classic worker placement game that has a lot of other stuff going on. You're also building a tableau, this village of cards in it. But at the core of the game, the way you're getting resources and gaining new cards is by placing workers on the board. And I think that system works really well. One of my favorite things about worker placement is that it's very easy to look around the board and see what you can get. Worker placement kind of requires a designer to simplify the action down to usually just a few icons, because otherwise it's too much to put on the board. It's something that you put on a card instead. And so I like that simplicity where if I know that I need 3 berries to play a certain card in my hand that I really want to play, I can easily look across the board and say, okay, that's how I get more berries. That's where I need to go. That's where I need to place my workers. And Everdell does that really, really well. Everdell also does the thing that I think some worker placement games do, where it gives you more workers automatically as the game progresses. I'm fine with worker placement games, including some that I've designed where you can acquire new workers by spending resources or doing something. But it's also nice for the game just to give you more workers sometimes. Lords of Waterdeep does that too, actually, right? Like
yes, sir.
Yes, the game, you get another worker.
Yep. Yeah. Yep. Yes, sir.
So that feels good. Yeah. Have you played Everdell? If it isn't on your list, feel free to.
Everdell is on my list.
Oh, it is. Okay.
It's further down. Yes, sir. Everdell's an incredible game. Like you said, it's relatively simple. Obviously, you're getting resources. You limited workers. I think that's the one thing that really intrigued me by it, is that a lot of worker placement games, you get a lot of workers in the very beginning, or the ability to get more as time goes along. Everdell, it's kind of the opposite. You start with a very low number and you slowly ramp up to the very end where you get more workers and the ability to maximize what you're trying to do, build out your tableau, and trying to do that thing. So it's an interesting take on it. It's something that I've definitely appreciated.
I would also recommend to anyone who sees this video and maybe is intrigued by Everdell that to keep in mind that it is not just a worker placement game, because if you play it strictly as a worker placement game, the game will go really fast if you're just placing workers, because the whole other side of the game is kind of extending your round by taking turns where you don't place workers and you're instead playing cards that maybe lead to other cards that you can play for free and things like that. I didn't get that at all the first time I played Everdell, because I just played it like a regular worker placement game.
Exactly.
And it was kind of boring. And so you have to kind of keep that in mind, that there's this whole other side of the game to explore, and then it really shines. Yeah. So what's your number 4 favorite worker placement game?
Number 4 is it's a favorite game of mine for me and my family. Parks. Parks is not the traditional worker placement where you put your worker out and you get whatever resources. There's a track obviously that you have to follow, and you have to plan your route efficiently if you want to maximize your points. And then also the fact that you can't go onto a space that someone else has been on unless you spend your fire token, your fireplace token, or your campfire. It's such a lovely game because the artwork, the theming, there's a little bit of history to it. It kind of explains like all the parks and gives a little tidbits of information. But this is another like wonderful game I bring for like newer players, or like a Gateway Plus game. I've even gotten my family, like my mom and dad are not big board gamers, but they absolutely love parks. They love parks and they love trails as well. So not a traditional worker placement game per se, but again, you're still putting your workers out, you're getting resources, you're visiting parks, and the added aspect of the track and where you have to plan everything out with your 2 workers, makes it a standout game for me for sure.
I really had not thought about this as a worker placement game, but I totally see what you're saying. It totally makes sense that why not in a worker placement game do you have the system where you can move / place a worker, but it has to be further ahead. I classify that into a slightly different category, but it totally makes sense for worker placement. And you mentioned one of my favorite things in worker placement game, where if you use a special type of worker or a special token, in this case the fire token, that you can take a space that someone else has already occupied. So there is a little bit of blocking, but you have that choice to get in if you really need that action.
Yes, sir.
I like that a lot. Yeah. My number 4 favorite worker placement game is Russian Railroads. This is a game that I primarily play on Board Game Arena now. I don't play it all that often in person, but I do like the tabletop version. It is kind of a track route building game, a little bit. Not like a web of routes like Ticket to Ride, but these routes that are scoring you more and more points and unlocking more and more bonuses. But the way that you extend those routes is by placing workers on the board. And the worker placement system, I think, is really similar to what I was talking about earlier, Lords of Waterdeep and Everdell, how it's very clear that if you need something, the board shows you clearly how to get it. And the choice is often, do you use which type of worker do you use, and do you spend one of those workers, or do you spend multiple of those workers? Because oftentimes there's like an action space that says this takes 1 worker to get you 1 of this thing, or you can spend 2 workers to get 3 of this thing. And so you're deciding at that moment, do I really need the 3, or which is slightly better, you're optimizing a little bit more per worker, but that's 1 less worker you can place someplace else. Do you really want to take that spot versus the lower spot that maybe you only need that 1 thing? I love that choice in Russian Railroads. There's also a whole other section of the board with other types of worker placement, things that you kind of want to be the first to grab if you can from other players. There's also a shifting worker placement spot that changes every round. Yeah, I really, really like the worker placement in Russian Railroads. Are you familiar with that one?
It's one I haven't played. I have heard of it though. It was something I would probably want to play online first before I look at investing in it, of course. But I have heard of it. 100% honest though, know very little about it other than the name. So thank you for introducing that to me. I greatly appreciate it.
It's a heavier one, and online does a good job of tracking the points, which really ramp up. Like in the first round, you only score 5-10 points, but by the last round, you're scoring all these. You can score like 200 points in the last round. So it works really well to play on Board Game Arena.
Yes, sir.
That's my number 4. What is your number 3 favorite worker placement game?
So my number 3, again, a different take on worker placement, but Honey Buzz.
Honey Buzz.
So Honey Buzz is a favorite of mine. Elf Creek Games, high quality games, lovely artwork, and the tile making, the tile laying is the main aspect of it. But how you get those tiles is through the workers that you start out with. And so when you place a worker, a beeple is what it's called. You can get a tile and place it in your hive and slowly build it out. What I really like about it though, and I think you've mentioned it before in your video, is the fact that if someone has gone to that spot, like you mentioned before, you can go there, but you have to pay +1 worker. So, or even if you've been there, like if there's a tile that you really, really think is going to make your engine work really well, and you've already been there, you have to spend an extra 1. So it's worker placement in terms of like, getting your tiles, doing everything you need, but also thinking ahead, being like, well, if Susie's going to, I feel like Susie's going to go over there, I need to have workers left over so I can go over there to where she's at. So you have to plan yourself out very carefully in Honey Buzz. But again, it's another favorite of mine, and that's actually one of my favorite mechanics, is you have to have multiple workers in order to get a tile from there.
Yeah, you mentioned earlier that Everdell it's really tight on the number of workers that you have. You don't have many workers. This is the opposite of that. You're getting a ton of workers, and you have to choose how to use them almost as resources. They're renewable resources because you get them back. But yeah, that's a great decision space there. Do you go to in fact, I often think when I'm playing this game, do I go to a spot that I only need 1 worker for right now, but I don't really need that tile all that much? Or do I go to this other spot that costs, I don't know, 3-4 workers where I really need it right now? That's a great decision space in the game.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Honey Buzz for your number 3. My number 3 is the one that we've talked about a little bit so far, Lords of Waterdeep. Many different reasons I love this game. I really love this game. And two of the things I wanted to mention real quick that I don't think we've already mentioned are, one, the worker placement system in it is really streamlined. It's probably the simplest game on this list, yet there's a lot of depth to the game that emerges through the cards and the tiles in the game. But when you put the game down on the table, there's like maybe 6 action spots, maybe 7. They're all very simple. You're getting like 1 resource. Maybe you're getting a card, or you can play a card. So it starts out very simple. That makes it really easy, I think, to onboard people into the game if they're new to it or if they haven't played it in a while. But then as you play, and this is my second favorite thing, based on what you've done during the game, largely due to the building tiles that are placed out there, those worker placement spots increase 2-fold, sometimes even 3-fold over the course of the game, with increasingly complex action spaces where you're getting a lot more stuff, and maybe what you're doing requires a little bit more thought. And I love that. I love that each session of the game feels like it really ramps up for all of the players based on what you've invested in terms of new action spots on the board. Both of those elements I really, really like about Lords of Waterdeep.
Yeah, it'll always be a classic of mine, a game I'll never get rid of. Once you add in the expansion as well, it really like just makes it even a more special, perfect game. But it's the quintessential, like, when I first volunteered for this, it was the #1 game I thought of was Lords of Waterdeep. And like, that's not only a good worker placement game, that's just a great game to have, whether you're new to the hobby, you're getting into it, or you're a seasoned veteran. It's definitely like almost a perfect game for everyone involved.
It's pretty incredible. And even there's plenty of other, we can keep talking about Lords of Waterdeep because like I love the mission structures, feels really good. But yeah, we've talked a lot about the worker placement, and that's what we're here for today. Great game, Lords of Waterdeep, #3 for me. What is your #2 favorite worker placement game?
So my #2, I had to work out to get this game off the shelf. So I have Everdell, the giant box. Everdell, just lovely artwork. I love the theming, the story behind it. But at its core, it is a worker placement game, and you're building out a tableau, which, like you mentioned before, is that another aspect of the game, and try to extend your turns. And we kind of already talked about it a little bit, but it's just how limiting everything is in the beginning. Is how can you make your turns last longer? How can you collect the most amount of resources? What are you going to do if someone takes a spot that you can't go to? What kind of contingency plans are you going to have? And it's such a wonderful game. But like you mentioned, also, it is a little tricky because if you play it just purely as a worker placement game, it goes by quick. You don't feel like you got the fulfillment out of it. But with that, combined with the story, the theme, and then also the tableau building and the resource management, just makes it an incredible game.
And this is one, I think this might be the only one on the list that we've mentioned so far. This one has private action spaces as well. There are certain cards that give you an action space that, and you probably refresh my memory here. I do have a copy. I love my copy, but I think other players might be able to place on your action spaces.
Yes. Other players can. There's a requirement, if I remember correctly. It's been a little while since I play. Like, I have the big box. It's hard to get it off the shelf and get through it. But if I remember correctly, other people can use your spots, but there's a requirement they have to meet first.
Yeah. That's always a neat twist of worker placement, where you can create an own worker placement spot that either you or other players can use, but there's a cost to it. Everdell on both of our lists. My #2 is maybe the heaviest game that we've talked about yet, and that is Tzolk'in. Tzolk'in has a lot going on. I always love showing the back of the box because it shows the gears on which you're placing workers, and the longer you leave those workers on the gears, the more they turn, the more the workers increase in value in terms of when you pull them off, because you pay to put the workers on, and then when you take them off, you don't pay anything. You just gain an awesome benefit. Certain actions do have an additional cost if you're like building a tile or something, but most of them you're just gaining an increasingly powerful benefit. So there's a wonderful, simple choice every time you take a turn in Tzolk'in. Are you going to use that as a placement turn where you're placing workers on these dials, or are you going to use this as a turn where you're taking one or more workers off the dials and gaining benefits? But the time mechanism of the dials combined with the worker placement is a choice that I really, really love about Tzolk'in.
Yeah, it's a game I've been invited a few times to play. I haven't played it, but I definitely know of it.
Uh-huh.
It's just whenever I go to the game shop, I'm always doing something else,
Yeah.
and like there's someone else who may be playing it. It's definitely on my list to play though. The gear mechanism, I think, like more so than just the worker placement, how the gears work and the time mechanism is something I would be interested in as well. But using those workers to either gain additional resources or either wait to gain additional resources or to pull them off now, it's a great choice to have in games.
I hope you have the chance to play it sometime because it's a game that I come back to time and time again. It's a heavier game. The learning game will probably take over 2 hours, but I highly recommend it. That's my number 2 favorite game, favorite worker placement game. We're down to the number ones, the big ones here. What is your number 1 favorite worker placement game right now?
So I went back and forth between Everdell and this one, but this one is definitely another special game for me. Flamecraft. When you, and I think in terms of all the other worker placement games, I think this is like the friendliest one. There's very little, if any, like take that towards people, but for me, games like artwork and design and theme is very important, and I just love the world that they created in Flamecraft. It's absolutely incredible. But going to different shops to collect resources, being able to upgrade those shops, obviously, to get to kind of customize what each shop is going to get. That choice that the player gets is something that's really awesome that you don't see maybe as much as other worker placements, but you can kind of evolve the building to the shop to whatever you want it to be. If like if you're running this gambit of I need bread or meat or whatever, you can keep upgrading this one building as you keep going to it, or have special abilities to upgrade it and make it even more powerful. So important choice there, but also giving the player power over the game.
And like you said, yeah, the world of Flamecraft is incredibly charming. I love the art. I love the look of it. And like you said, there's a lot of kind of positive player interaction in the game. It feels really good. It doesn't feel like a mean game in any way.
Exactly.
Yeah. I like that pick a lot. And that's probably, I noticed our list includes a lot of games that were designed and released years ago. This is probably, I think, the newest one on the list.
Yeah.
Talked about so far. Yeah. All right. So Flamecraft at number 1 for you. My number 1 is a fairly new game. Came out a few years ago. Expansions were still being released, and that is Dune Imperium. Yeah. Another longer worker placement game, maybe the longest on the list. Tzolk'in and this are probably competing at 2+ hours. But Dune Imperium combines deck building with worker placement in a really interesting way, where you play a card on your turn. All you're doing is playing a single card, and that card will show you where you are allowed to place a worker on the board. If you're placing it on the desert planet itself, if you're placing it kind of on this high council area, or if you're influencing one of 4 different factions in the game. And yeah, here's what the game looks like there. But I love that mechanism. That mechanism is so streamlined. And to add to that, it's a little bit of the deck building side of things, but that choice of which card to play or where you're going to place the worker, paired with the cards that you don't play, are used at the end of each round to either buy more cards or to engage in combat. So there's a great decision space there of how important is this worker placement spot that I need to go on, and I need to play this card to go there, versus what's on the bottom of this card for me to save for the end of the round. I've had a lot of fun with Dune Imperium. I've only explored the first expansion so far. I'm looking forward to exploring the second one at some point. But the base game itself gives me so much fun and replayability and so much tension. A lot of these games that we're talking about, you end the game with 100 points, 200 points. In Dune Imperium, you're ending the game with 10 points. So every point means so much in this game. Have you played this one?
I have not. It's kind of a running joke. I have a game group that I have that it's always on our list to play, and we'll play a couple games, and then it will either be too late, or I'm kind of burnt out, or something along those lines. But I know that it's going to be on our list of games to play next time I go visit my friend a little while from here. But yeah, it's I know the importance of it. It's definitely gone down as like one of the best games ever. It's definitely ranked up there. It's just everything about it. I mean, everything that you mentioned as well. using cards to get resources, where you place your workers, how many cards you want to play. Are you going to keep the cards to use that to improve your deck or if you're fighting later? Just wonderful choices for the player, of course.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I love thinking about worker placement and talking about it. As a designer, it was often like early on when I was getting into design, it was like my go-to mechanism, to the point where I intentionally said, okay, I need to focus on other mechanisms than worker placement. But maybe someday I'll return to it because I love designing in that space and playing in that space. Are there any upcoming games that are coming out that maybe you've backed or you're pre-order, or you've heard about that have worker placement that you're excited about? I know this is a tough question, but
I haven't really backed many games recently. I will say the one game that I did receive recently, that I haven't played yet, and I talked about it at the beginning, was Darwin's Journey.
yes.
I did play it when it was when the Kickstarter was going on. But it's a game I really wanted to delve into to explore a little bit more. There's just a lot of great things you can do in that game, all the combo making you can make with worker placement.
Yeah, that's one that I've only played once so far, but I agree the worker placement is really satisfying. And that's a game where I love that you are improving who your workers are essentially over the course of the game. There are lots of actions that require your workers to have X number of skills. And if you don't have those skills, you can't even take those actions, or you need to spend extra resources to do so. But you can also just upgrade your worker over the course of the game so they have all those skills and they can take those special actions. That feels really good. I think the only one on my list, I was kind of scrolling through Kickstarter. I know there are other games out there, but a lot of them are on Kickstarter for me, to see if there are any coming up. And the only one I can see that I can think of right now is the Sleeping Gods sequel, Distant Skies.
Distant Skies, yeah.
It doesn't have a lot of worker placement, but one of the shared areas of the game, because it's a fully cooperative game, is where you are placing workers on a ship. And I don't even know if the sequel has that. I know the original Sleeping Gods has that area where you're placing workers on the ship to maintain your health and the ship's health and things like that. So it's kind of just a little bit of worker placement in the game. I'm curious to see if the sequel has that as well.
Yeah. I own Sleeping Gods, haven't played it yet. It's on my list. I think your video actually convinced me to get it, talking about it.
Yeah.
I actually did think of another game that is coming up. It's not worker placement per se, but you are placing things out onto the board. Fractured Sky is coming out. Yes. You're not putting workers out per se, but you're putting out armies sort of to conquer areas, and you can get resources based off of that. So that just popped in my head thinking about that. That's one I'm really excited about, is Fractured Sky.
I'm curious about that one. And even Expeditions kind of has a little bit of worker placement. It definitely is not traditional worker placement where you're placing a worker on the board or workers on the board and claiming a spot from someone else. It does not have that. Well, it actually kind of does too. Yeah, it has two. Okay. Expedition has two slight different types of worker placement. One is that you have this mech that you're moving around the board, and the mech essentially acts as a worker where you're gaining the benefit of the location that you end up on, and no one else can go there while your mech is there. So there is that. But you also have worker meeples that you're placing on cards in your active row, cards that you play, to activate a bonus ability on that card. So that side of it is the side that looks the most like worker placement, but really is not traditional, because no one else can place on your cards. No one is blocking you. It's just, do you have the worker or not to place there? But the mech part of the game, it definitely has the feel of worker placement.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Well, Justin, this has been a delight to talk about worker placement with you. Do you have anything else that you'd like people to know before we sign off?
Not a lot. I've been doing board games for a while. I have an Instagram. I'm trying to get into podcasting for board games. Just haven't had the time recently, but if anyone is interested, Jamey, if I may, I can plug myself really quick. The Excel Gamer is what I'm known at, is on Instagram. So if you can give me a follow there, that'd be really cool. I'm hoping to start podcasting here the next couple months, and be going from there. But yeah, starting my next leg of my board game journey. I'm very, very excited for it.
I will put a link to your Instagram in the description below if anyone wants to click on it and follow along with Justin's gaming journey. And if anyone watching this would like to share their favorite or their top 3 favorite or top 5 favorite worker placement games, or comment on the games that we've talked about here, I always love talking about mechanisms and especially worker placement. So let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you so much. And thank you, Justin, for joining me today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me, Jamey. I really appreciate it.
Thanks.